This is the presentation on loss mitigation, to make sure you're all in the right room. My name is Gary Harmon, and this is my partner in crime, Kevin Kent. We're going to do this as a two-part thing, really talking about the underwriting piece first, and then things in collections. So do you want to stand up, or do you want to...
I'll go sit down while you speak, and then I'll come back up. How about that?
That sounds wonderful.
All right.
Okay. So we're both from Byrider. I really want to say JD Byrider because I've been trained to do that for the last 3 years. As Byrider, we are a franchise organization in the subprime space. We've been in this subprime space for over 25 years. Here comes my cable. Hold a second, gentlemen. I will take you through this, and you'll get the pictures later. If you have the app, the presentation is on the app. I apologize that the AV is not working. So, as I said, I'm from Byrider. We're an established subprime auto lender headquartered in Carmel, Indiana. We've been there for 25 years. We're really two businesses. We're a corporate store business with 30 dealerships we run ourselves, and a franchise business that runs about 120 franchisees. I'm the Chief Risk Officer, and as such, I'm building the tools and the approach to data and loss management that works across both the company stores, which are our own portfolio, and the franchisees. The advantage of doing it is that I have scale. So with 140 different franchisees in subprime, I have a large data set of losses, and we'll talk about this as we go forward, that helps us build models and build the type of infrastructure that I think puts us ahead of some of our competitors. The organization we're in is in 31 states. The company stores are all mostly in the Midwest. We're around Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. The franchisees are across 30 states in the U.S. So, why am I here talking to you today? Well, I've been part of Byrider for about 3 years. I joined in about 2015 at a point where we, Byrider, and I think many of you in the audience, were having some problems with elevated loss rates. As we came out of last recession, which is now an awful long time ago, 2008, 2009, it's a decade ago, we had a few years of really wonderful loss management. Everybody tightened, and as they tightened, those of us who are in the subprime and the near-prime space got an advantage. The banks tightened up, they moved out of the space, giving room in the space for those of us who still had capital and good business models to be able to execute. Back in about 2013-14, people started entry. We saw an awful lot of entry from financial services startups. The competition raised. As the competition raised, the people in this space, subprime lending, got adversely selected. And what I mean by that is the new entrants competed more strongly. They offered better prices, and as a result, they took away the better customers that were coming to the traditional subprime lenders. And as a result of that, in the space, we saw our losses going up substantially. If you look at the static pool loss curves, which is how we measure loss, which is what is your loss going to be over the life of the receivable you put on, they moved from the low 20s to the mid-30s. And as your losses go up, it has a huge impact to the expected profitability of the business. And quite honestly, the stuff that we were seeing in 14 and 15 wasn't profitable business. I was brought in with the recognition that we had to do something new with these new loss rates. And we saw it as a new normal. For a couple of years, we were hoping that it would roll back over as this new entrants found they couldn't make money and came out. But the realization happened in about 16 and 17 that they weren't going to roll over, and the level of competition we see in the space today is here to stay. And if we're going to survive, we have to be good enough to survive in this marketplace. And the way to survive is to be able to build strong, sustainable loss mitigation processes, and behind that have a repeatable business process which is done operationally efficiently. Now, I'm not going to talk about the operational efficiency bit. That's my friend Kevin, who will come up second. I'm going to talk to you a bit about the data and what we're doing to manage the risk piece. And to give you some background and make you stay and listen to me, my background is risk management. I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. I have an MBA from Cornell. I've worked for American Express, for First Chicago. I spent a lot of time with Household, which became HSBC, and was their chief risk officer for their auto business back before the last break. I've also worked for smaller organizations, worked for a credit union in LA for a few years. So I love doing this risk management stuff, and quite honestly, it's easier than it seems. We can get into pretty sophisticated stuff. We can talk about loss regression, segmented models, negative inference, and a whole lot of technical stuff which you probably aren't interested in and really aren't at the core of what you have to do. If you're going to manage your losses in a structured way, you have to have a game plan, you have to get the organization around it, and you start needing to marshal your resources. And what we did in the 2015-16 time period is we started building our first generation of, I think, strong risk models. This is something we called ARE2. It's a standard loss regression model. It was built off 6 or 7 years worth of data from us and our franchisees, and it was pretty simple. It had 12 variables, 5 of them from the Bureau, 7 of them were internal, which were stability and deal related. And quite honestly, it just works quite well. But building the model is only part of it. The big, strong piece that we all have to think about is how do we implement and what's the structures we put around it. So going into 2016 period, we had underwriters at the stores. I assume many of you have underwriters at your stores. We had a judgmental underwriting approach which relied on their expertise. We did a lot of verifications and we did interviews with customers, but they were, I wouldn't call them unstructured. They were structured in the sense there was a piece of paper with some questions on it that the underwriter talked to the customer on and we trained to. But the answers to those questions weren't captured in the system. The notes from the conversation weren't captured in the system, and no learning was gained from what was happening from that experience in the sense that it wasn't a repeatable process. We also, in that manual underwriting process, did a budget with customers. And what I mean by a budget is that in the conversation with the customer, we filled out literally a budget. This is your income. This is how much you spend on food, on housing, on clothing, on cigarettes, on everything else. And again, it's not a bad process. It's not a bad practice. It's inconsistent. If you have 60 people doing this across 30 dealerships, you're going to get 60 different approaches to the same thing. And that's something we did have data on, right? Because we had those budgets. The end result of that budgets, we could see how much disposable income we had, and we could check to see whether those levels of disposable income were a determinant of risk. And I can tell you they weren't. So as we started building out processes with a new risk model, we decided that we had to automate the whole process for consistency and for data capture. So as we went through 2016, we implemented a new risk model, and we implemented it in a structured process where underwriters still go through interviews, and they still do today, with a customer. Those interviews were a series of questions which are now programmed into the system. The answers are captured, so I can do some learnings on it afterwards. We did away with the budget, and we created a relatively simple disposable income calculator, which is basically your net income less the auto expense minus your housing expense minus a fixed amount per adult in the household plus dependent in the household, and use that for determining affordability. And we started seeing a turnaround in how our losses worked. And when you come down to it, I said that there's a lot of sophisticated math behind some of this, but it's about process, structure, and it's about what I think of as the 3 C's of credit. And those who know me, who are tittering in the back over there, I like talking about the 3 C's of credit because it's a way of everyone in the organization understanding what you're trying to do. And for those of you who aren't risk people, the 3 C's are character, capacity, and collateral. And it doesn't matter if you're a prime lender or a subprime lender. If you think about the decisions you're making in those terms, you can put a structure that you can talk to your organization about that helps you make consistent and good decisions. In our space, we're dealing with a relatively stressed individual. Character, which is the first of the C's, is about how people historically have paid their debts, right? So when we talk about risk models, what we're normally doing is talking about, I've got the person's bureau, I can see how they've paid people historically, and I've captured that in a score, call it a FICO score or a Vantage, and that gives me a measure of their character and their ability and willingness to pay me back in the future. The second piece of this is always, character capacity. So capacity is really about income. So our customer base is a relatively low income group of people. Our average income is around $2,500 a month net. So $3,000 gross, mid-30s annual income. So these are, I think of as good Americans who are just good Americans is a bad phrase, sorry. They're good customers who have limited financial ability. They need a car to get to work, and we have to worry about whether they have enough of that income to cover their net exposures. And the third bit we always think about is collateral. So how good is the piece of collateral you have? That's the vehicle. We at BuyRider do a lot to make sure that the car we're selling is reliable. They're older cars. They're about 5-7 years old, 100,000 miles. They're fully reconned. We always have a warranty or extended service contract to support it, and we support our customers to keep them in those cars. But if you're thinking about those 3 dimensions, it helps you think about how am I structuring deals and how am I allowing to come through the funnel. I wish this was up. I'm sorry. Anyway, so moving forward. So if you think about those 3 dimensions, then you want to have, well, you've got to think about how you create, and if those who are looking on the app, I'm on page 7. You want to have a view of what is the funnel for applications. So if you think about the way you take an application in, we have a customer who comes into your door, they fill out an application, and in the credit process, you want to take them through 3 processes. The first thing you want to do is you want to look at them in terms of, do they meet all your policy requirements? So you have a program or a product, and you want to make sure, are they a good fit? And you might knock them out because you don't do commercial vehicles. We have long conversations about whether we should be lending to people, for instance, who are full-time Uber drivers. We have made a decision at the moment that we will not do commercial lending. So if you're a commercial driver, we will not lend you a car. We will look at other policy things, maybe things like fraud. Are there fraud alerts on the bureau that we cannot reconcile? Do you have a valid driver's license? Everybody has different views about how to check it. We tend to go to the thing that we want you to have a valid driver's license, and we go as far as not just taking a picture of your driver's license, but contacting the DMV and making sure that that driver's license is valid and you are not suspended for any reason. As you get through those policy constraints, you then want to look at affordability. If a customer cannot afford the loan, they're not going to pay you back. I talked a little bit about budgets a second ago. We've got a structure where we're looking for a minimum income, $1,200 net income per month, and we have this check on your disposable. Do you have a positive disposable income that will allow you to pay the loan, which, as I said, is done with this net income minus auto expense minus your rent, housing expense, and a fixed amount per person. Those aren't perfect checks, but they're at least getting us to a base point where we believe that the customer who we're going to go forward with in this application has the means to be able to pay that loan. It's only when people get through those policy checks and get through those affordability checks that we get on to looking at the scoring. And here, as I said, we've got a scorecard, ARE2, which has had its 12 variables, which creates a score. And we turn that score into something that is relatively easy for people to understand. It's the probability of you being good. So if you have a score of 0.8, that says there's 80% chance of you being good. If you have a score of 0.2, that means you have a 20% score of being good. If you have a score of 0.2, we're going to decline you because if you're only 20% of the people are going to be good, there's no way we can make money off that population. I know that different people have different views on how to build scorecards and how to display them. I like breaking it down into something relatively straightforward. I dislike having scores in that 600, 700 range. I don't think everybody understands what they mean. I think translating them into something that an underwriter or a salesperson can just look at and go, yeah, I know what that means and I know what he's trying to say is useful. The second piece of what we did is we translated that absolute score, which has this meaning of probability of being good, into a risk tier. And we put our business around 4 risk tiers. And for us, Tier 1 was the highest risk individual that we're going to do a loan with. Tier 3 and Tier 4 are the lowest risk, our best customers. And we've put a lot of work into trying to understand the differences of the two, to trying to get our marketing to drive apps into the system, to drive more of the 3s and 4s, and to build a business process that helps us get more 3s and 4s. While half of the story of getting losses better has been the discipline and the improvement in the losses, the other half is driving the right customers through our funnel. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we spent as much money and time and effort building out the business process as we have on the risk piece, and that's driven risk results by about the same amount. And I'm going to diverge on that a little bit. Back in 2016 timeframe when we were talking about these credit loss problems, not only did we have this judgmental credit process, but we were quite a traditional subprime buy here, pay here lender in the sense that we weren't very open in how we talked to and disclosed to our customers. So if you came onto our website, you couldn't see the inventory. You had to give us your contact information first, the idea being that when we had your contact information, we would let you see inventory. We then had a way of reaching out, contacting you, and trying to bring you in a store to take the loan further. I was just here for the Carvana presentation, which is the one before, which is the sort of the 10 steps further than where we are. But what we recognize is in the new world where people go and buy things on the web and want to have a good customer experience in an open structure, that we just couldn't live selling cars the way we used to. And so we've moved to being ungated, which means that when people go onto our website, they can see our inventory. All our inventory is priced, and before it wasn't, so the prices are open. And we're beginning to move into the world where we're not going to be Carvana, where we can take you all the way through the process without you talking to a human, because we still want people to come into the stores. But we're moving down the path of trying to get to more automated decisioning and a cleaner path for the customer to be able to come into our stores and get the car they need. And all those things drive credit. I mean, I only go make the diversion because driving credit is about the credit structure and about the business model, and we've done a bit of both. On the credit models, I talked about the first model having 12 variables. 5 of them were bureau. The other ones were internal things, which are about stability and the deal. Things like, how many months have you been employed? How many months have you been at your current home? How much cash have you got to put down? And what we found in that model was there was as much lift from the non-bureau attributes as there were from the bureau attributes. And as a result, making sure that we had quality in those things was tremendously important. I think if you are an independent finance company and you're buying on the web or buying through a dealer network, you have the problem of not being 100% certain of the data you have. I think the verification processes and the checks we're doing, our underwriters, I think, are as important what they're doing in verifying data as they are in making credit decisions, is about making sure that that data is right. Employment is probably one of those key ones. It's not just checking what your income it is, it's really knowing, yes, he says he was employed for 6 months, is that true? He said that his last job was for 2 years and there was no gap, is that true? Because there are huge differences in 6 months and 3 months, or 6 months and 2 years with no gap, 6 months and 2 years with a 6-month gap. If you don't know how to get that data accurate, you can't build the right models, and you can't make the right decisions. And it's those simple variables, like employment and income, that are as important as those bureau ones. And we got a huge amount of lift just by getting the data right around employment and income for our customers. But that's the beginning of the story. As you move from 2006 onwards, I wanted to try and layer in additional tools within our risk management. And one of the things that I think a lot of people in this room think about is alternate data sources. So over the 2016-17 time period, we talked to Anovis, LexisNexis, Clarity, ID Analytics. We did tests with all of them. We implemented at the beginning of 2017 a custom scorecard with LexisNexis, which we added into our original 2.0 score and got a significant lift in how we were calling risk. Any of you who have the scale or a partner with the scale to do this, it really is important to look at some of these alternative data sources. They really do add lift. It's not mind-shattering that you're going to double your volume, but just driving another 5 to 10% of volume at the same credit risk makes a huge difference. We put in LexisNexis in 2017, and we kept on going. We rebuilt that first scorecard over the summer of 2017 and implemented the most recent version in 2018, and that includes LexisNexis and Clarity. We found both were added value, and it also included a utilities database that Equifax has. So we now have 3 sources of alternate data, and I'm continuing to look at other sources. I think that for the traditional alt bureaus, at 3 sources I've probably got enough. Just like when you look at the bureaus, when you've got 2 bureaus, you probably don't need to buy a third. but there is continual advances in the gathering of data by third-party sources, and we should continue to all look at them and see what value we're getting. The other thing we added in the next generation is some segmentation. As you're thinking about your risk management, all your customers are not the same. When we built the first model, it was a straightforward, everyone goes into the same scorecard, 12 variables, got good results. In the latest version, we recognized that we should do some level of segmentation, and we ended up with what is really a pretty classic segmentation. We have a thin file segment, we have a thick file with an auto trade, and a thick file without an auto trade. And that clearly got us some lift. Those models really do have different attributes in them, and they do describe behavior better than without. We also bifurcated the model in the sense that we had these 3 segments up front, which were talking about how good the customer is. So I'm scoring you in these 3 segments on your character risk. And then afterwards, I have a deal risk. What I wanted to do is get a call of how good are you as a person relative to how good are you as a deal. And now we can talk internally about, well, he's a good person, but the deal's wrong because the risk score's off. You need to go back and get a co, or you need to go back, get some more cash down, or get a trade to improve the deal score so that we can get a car to this customer. And the deal score at the moment for us is pretty simple. It's 5 variables. It's about cash. It's about, are you a prior customer of us? Do you have a co? Do you have a trade? It's what you would expect. We are not doing modeling on the vehicle itself because we don't want to be able to tell our customer that he can only have this car at $12,000 and not that car at $12,000 on the lot. When we approve you for $12,000, any car you can afford on the lot at $12,000 you can have. If you are an indirect lender, you would probably want to put risk models. If you're an independent dealer who is doing buy here, pay here, I think we're taking the right approach, and I don't think you should be trying to build auto variables into your risk scores, because it's just going to create confusion for customers. So we now have, a segmented 2-stage model with some good characteristics. We haven't quite finished. The next things I really want to look at is fraud. We are looking at a couple of new sources for it to see if we can pick up fraud. And the way I think about picking up fraud is not the traditional, well, this is a fraud loss and this is a credit, because I don't think we're very good at identifying of our losses which ones are fraud and which ones are credit per se. What I'm really trying to do is, can I build an early default model versus a late default model? In the first iterations, we tried this multiple times and couldn't quite get it right. I'm hoping with different data sources, there's some data sources out there of consortium data for frauds and other such things, that we may be able to get a lift by identifying those high-risk individuals who have higher propensity for fraud as early loss defaults, rather than the other way around. I'm hoping. It's making positive noise.
Can I bounce out of this real quick?
Yes. Yeah. So the result of all that is that we now have a structured risk process which is consistent. It's totally automated with complete data capture, and it has a set of models behind it which are in about their 3rd generation. With that, I'm going to pass on to my colleague, Kevin Kent, who's going to talk a little bit about the other side of loss mitigation, the collection side, and the people side.
Thank you, Gary.
Oops.
Well, Gary's brought you down the journey on the risk side. I'm accountable for, I call it the people business. So I have operations for Byrider, which includes BDC, underwriting, and then collections. And in this journey, with our scale capabilities, Gary gave you a little history of where we were, how we did some business in the past. Each store had those skill sets in each one of those areas. There's been centralization. And centralization has been very beneficial. So when I mean centralization, the BDC now operates in one location in the corporate store. Underwriting, we've regionalized that into 3 locations. And also collections, essentially, is in 2 locations. We have our mothership, if you will, that's in Carmel, and we have another location in Ohio. So we have the people all working in these locations. And that has enabled us to make sure we can garner best practices of each one of the top performers and look to bring that and spread that across the other people so they can learn and demonstrate those practices in their journey for success. But with the people need assistance in tools and capability. So Byrider has certainly made some investments going out into the marketplace, sizing up what are those tools. And there's no shortage of different tools in the marketplace. And each one of these tools have a long list of here's what you should be able to gain by using these tools. So there is a discipline that you should go through to understand what are the tools that you should be looking for in your operations. Today, we benefit greatly by using a centralized telephony system. And tools that go along with that, it's a blended inbound and outbound telephony utility. So a collector, we can establish calling campaigns based on key data sources on how we're going about approaching these customers. So you put the calling campaign up, at the same time that collector can be available for an inbound call. And frankly, the people enjoy that diversity. There's one thing to sit down, put on your headset, and work through that list, because the dialer is presenting these calls to you. And the dialer is sorting out answer machines. That also makes the experience of the collector more enjoyable, because it's not an easy job. But having answer machines and a manual dialing experience, it's a lot of cost for operations. So that dialer brings return on sifting out those answer machines. At the same time, if you have the inbound volume is priceless. So that inbound contact is the contact you want to make sure you grab first. So your telephony system can be designed in a way that your inbound call is a high priority call, and your collector will be made available to get that call within a certain period of time. And once your collector is finished with that, so that dialer and your inbound blend allows you to optimize your collector experience. And frankly, the people enjoy that diversity of doing that outbound campaign at the same time knowing that inbound call is typically going to be beneficial for them. So certainly within the people business, you have your incentive campaigns. You want to make sure that you put together incentives that are going to be prudent for them, at the same time yield the right performance indicators. We do that in a way of different levels of delinquency. So today, we have divided our operations, if you will, in different stages of delinquency. Now, this is just the beginning of the journey, because frankly, just segmentation of delinquency, all that being a good step, those customers, though, they'll travel through that different stage of delinquency, and just because they're a 1-day, well, they might have been a 90-day account. And so the capability of that collector is quite different in late stage versus mid stage versus early stage. So we've tried to put a model together where the collectors will come through. Each collector has its own skill set. Usually in that people journey, we look for them to first start out with early stage collections, 1, 2 payments past due. Then you get to mid stage collections, you get 2+, and then we go to a late stage collections where that's a real grind of making sure that conversation is going to yield and prevent a charge-off. So the tools, the dialer, blended inbound, outbound. There's another tool that we have implemented, and that is texting. Today, we absolutely know that while a phone campaign and having that conversation is very valuable, the customers have different contact preferences. And while the telephony is a solution, it's not the only solution in a way of communicating with your customer. Our texting for what we call our right party contact, that has gone up exponentially in the last 18 months. For two reasons. Our customers now know that we have that capability, so they're more engaged with us via text. When they go through a hard time, not everybody wants to sit on the phone and explain what my hard time is. They would simply rather just say, I'm going to try to make my payment on this date. And so we try to make sure we have those text conversations with the customer if that's their preference. If that's the way we're going to be able to get that customer to be engaged with us, and the phone is not their preference, the texting is a pathway of keeping the customer in the car. We've also built some self-service tools. So you have a web portal, you want to go in and make your payment. If you don't want to speak to anybody, you can go in and make your payment. You can schedule that payment to be auto-paid. So it helps the customer experience with these tools, and the customers today really command that type of experience. And we're fortunate to be able to have some scale so we can make these investments on behalf of the customer, and at the same time it makes the people experience and operations more enjoyable. So the online portal works. Your traditional, when you call in, part of the telephony, we do have a IVR, so press 1 for this, press 2 for that, so a customer can self-serve through the IVR. At the same time, we use that machine to also authenticate the customer, so who's calling, and we identify that caller to determine where are they in their delinquency. So what level of delinquency are they, and I will then route that call to the right stage of delinquency. So the idea is to make sure when that call comes in, it goes to the right skill set to have the best conversation and the best outcome. So these tools are certainly in the market, and frankly, they've become more and more affordable recently. In the journey, dialers were quite expensive in the past, but it's not that expensive anymore. There's different ways in which you can introduce that into your ecosystem to make it affordable for you. Let me just see what else I had to. There's other things that we're working on. So Gary talked about the system in which we have and trying to make sure we capture information. And in this journey, we've recognized that the collector harvests a lot of information out of the conversation. And so what we try to do is we've had historically, the collector puts in their comments and there's lots of narrative. We're trying to make sure that that narrative then can be translated into data, which then helps us manage the risk of each of that customer. So this information that we're pulling in, we know if I reached out to that customer, how did I reach out to them? Was it a phone call? Was it a text? What time of day? And so we use this information in a way to try to make sure that the next contact, we know that Kevin Kent, we were successful reaching him in the morning time, so and the next time we need to reach out to Kevin Kent, we're going to find that Kevin Kent is a high probability I can reach out to him in the morning. If it was a phone or a text. So use that information as a way of that intelligence of having more success, both for the people side and at the same time for the customer experience. Trying to make the job easier for the people is critical when it comes to the risk aspect of it. And our model is try to keep the customer in the car. So we do arm the collectors with some tools that with agreement from Gary, different classifications of tools that we look to use. Customers do come into different life events. and we try to make sure that we understand what the life events are and then deploy some tools. Simply put, if I've had a job change, maybe my job change has forced me to have my payments, my paycheck come in at a different Friday. By and large, our portfolio, our customers pay every other week, by and large. And so we try to make sure when we make the loan that we tie that payment date when their paycheck comes in. And in the event that customer has a job change, in the event that that payment date is changed, our collectors are empowered to do that due date change. So we try to keep the customer in the car, line up the payment when the customer gets their money. Because frankly, our customer doesn't have a lot of cash on hand. And so for risk mitigation, having that payment due the same time their pay comes in is meaningful. Okay, so that is a tool the collector uses. At the same time, customer can be out of work for a period of time. So we will do what we call it a fresh start. Engage the conversation with the customer, understand what happened, require a couple of payments so they can demonstrate that they can stay in the car, and then we'll do a payment extension, if you will. So there's different tools in which you can look to deploy in your practice to manage that risk. On the people side, through that centralization, we've also built in an online training practice for compliance. So each one of the collectors go through a rigor of understanding what and how they're supposed to do. How do they treat bankruptcy? So it's a complicated business. And when you operate in many states and you have people trying to understand all those various regulations, then we have an online solution where the collectors come through in their journey and they have to pass these tests to ensure they can demonstrate that they've done it, that they understand how then to deploy it in their practice. Okay? So having that skill set, hiring the right people, getting the right talent, that's part of the people business, but you need to make sure that that knowledge, because the environment continues to change, and it's not getting simpler. So having these tools online so that people can take these exams, demonstrate that they understand, comprehend, and deploy. We also have in our telephony solution the ability to record calls and then sample those calls. So we have a sampling methodology on the type of calls by collector. We have a structured scoring means on what good looks like, and we look to provide feedback for those collectors so they can improve their experience with the customer. And actually, they appreciate that feedback. It's not uncommon to have a collector listen to their own call so they can hear it themselves. So that type of tool, that recording tool and the playback is very valuable. It also it's good oversight from a compliance and risk management perspective. I go back to the people incentive. And you want to be careful on what type of incentives you put in. Incentives drive behavior, and not always the right behavior. So you need the means to measure and monitor. It's a cycle. We frequently will change our incentive depending on what's happening in our environment, the degrees of delinquency. I don't have the same incentive for across the collection cycle. So I have a different incentive for my early stage versus my mid stage versus my late stage. Those degrees of delinquency, we've learned that having different incentives for those cycles give me a better success and actually keeps the customer in the car. And so it's important you understand your incentives and how that drives behavior, both for the customer and at the same time for the operators. There's some other tools in which we use for managing risk. Putting a GPS in the car. That has been, I think, a game changer for us on making sure that the customer, we put that in every car, and that GPS does help us find that car if we need to. I mean, the customer's going to do one of two things. They're going to give you your car back if they can't afford it, or you're going to have to go get it. So that tool does help us in finding the car, retrieving the car. We do not use start or interrupt. That's a conscious decision that we've made at this point. But that GPS is a tool that if you don't put it in your car, I would strongly encourage you to think about putting that solution in your car. It's worth the investment. Gary also mentioned that when in managing risk, we sell the car, make sure it's in good working condition. We also have a warranty package. Cars that have 100,000 miles that are 5 years old will have some tendency to need some care. And so with the underwriting practice, there's also a service package that goes along with that, again, with the aim of keeping the customer in the car. If that car is not working, there's a high probability that customer is not getting back and forth to work. So we try to make sure that we provide the right car, we provide a warranty that keeps that car running with the aim of keeping the customer in the car so they can then live the right lifestyle and pay back on the loan. I've covered what I was looking to cover. You come up and we'll answer any questions, Gary.
Sorry, have the mic back up. Thank you. I'm sorry that we don't have the presentation. I think we got the material. That the end of this was a pretty looking graph, and I'll describe it to you just because you don't have the visual, that shows how our losses have come down since the 2015, 2016 time period. So by putting in these loss mitigation processes, by centralizing and standardizing what we're doing in operations, we've really brought our losses back down to the mid-20s in static poor loss rather than the mid to high 30s. So about 25% loss drop, and we're doing more volume per store. We were historically doing 40 to 42 sales per store. We're now in the 45 range. So anytime you can raise your volume and drop your losses that amount is a good thing. Rather than just keep on pushing on the same thing, we'd like to open it for questions about what we've been doing and how we've been doing it. I do think that I'd like to hear what some of your experiences have been. I know that we have an advantage of scale and we have sophistication in the modeling, but I'd like any of your questions about how we're doing it, what sort of things you might be wanting to do. Yes, in the back. We don't incentivize reconditioning. We do have budgets around reconditioning and expectations. So we try and manage it within a range. And we're pretty good at doing that. But that's really around managing the operations. I don't think that impacts the quality. The incentive should be around the throughput and managing the process rather than saying, hey, I want to drop my recon $100. It's really got to be about quality because we want to have a car that is going to last. As I said, we own the paper. If the car breaks down in the first 6 months, we're going to have to fix it. So the answer is yes and no. Sorry. Yeah, the lady in the white sweater. You must be in our business. Their question was about what do we do if a customer mistreats the car, i.e. They don't come in for service, they don't have an oil change, the engine blows up, 50,000 miles. We don't not give them a new car, but most of those people are going to be defaulting, and people who've defaulted with us do not get new vehicles. It's a real problem. There are customers who just don't look after their cars. Fortunately, I think it's the minority. We do some positive things, such as we offer $10 oil changes. We're really encouraging our customers by making it easy for them. We also are not using service as a profit center. So we're offering service at I think, is it $50? One of my co-workers, I think it's about $50 an hour for the time, and it's parts at cost. So we're trying to get people to come in, and if there's something wrong with the car, we want it fixed. If we can cover our costs, we're happy. And that's different than a traditional dealer model where they're trying to get profit out of the service. And we find by doing that, we're encouraging people to come back, and we have less of the problem you're describing, although the problem you're describing is real.
We're quite fortunate with the majority of our customers, though, do buy that extended warranty, and they find value in it. And as Gary shared, that our cost in the service, it's not a profit center. It's the aim there is to try to cover the cost by providing that service while keeping the customer in the car.
Yes, sir.
We make the money in the portfolio.
So the guy in the blue shirt. So the question is, have we changed our buying habits over the last couple of years? And the short answer is yes. And some of our franchisees think we're crazy. They're standard buy here, pay here dealers. They're trying they got a picture of what the inventory should be. They want to get their cash back as fast as they can. As we've got a slightly better customer base, and I clearly am not going to say we have a good customer base. We're still a subprime lender. We have improved our inventory. We've probably, on average, an extra $1,000 in our cash-in deal, probably maybe $1,500 over our franchisees, and we think that helps. I think having some better cars on the lot encourages people to come in. People don't always buy the best on the lot, but if you have a better selection of vehicles, as well as the other things I talked about us doing, putting the inventory on the web, putting the prices on the web, we've found that we are doing better in terms of the mix of the sales. And we do think the inventory is part of it. Good question. Thank you. Yeah.
What do you do if you find that one of your customers is they're using their vehicles for commercial lease? What do you do in that case?
This is one of those hard questions, right? I'll give you my underwriting answer, and we're discussing what we should be doing as we speak. What we've made the decision on is that if Uber is a add-on to your income, we're okay with it. So what we're going to do is look at what your primary income source is. If you can afford the car on the primary income source, if you're doing Uber or you're delivering pizzas or something else after work and that's additional income, good on it. The one we are drawing the line at the moment is Uber is your primary source of income. And we are concerned about the wear and tear on the vehicles and the consequences to losses from that. We are thinking about a different program that we might be able to support that, but today we have not done it. And I think this is probably the way to think about this. A lot of the Uber drivers, the other people who are driving, if it's not for Uber, for food delivery or whatever it is, it's not their primary source of income. Let's not take that car away or not give them the car because they're trying their best to make a living. And we're okay with that. And yes, I do know, if they're using it for pizza delivery, maybe there's a little bit more wear and tear on the vehicle. But we've been able to live with that, and we found that as long as it's the secondary income, we're getting a more robust customer, and we think we're doing the right thing.
So I'll add to that, Gary. That's at the point of the credit decision. Now, customers do go through life changes, and if they are now on our books and they've moved from one trade to another, and their second trade now, or their primary source is Uber, we have not taken a position that you can't have the car anymore. So
yeah.
We don't find that to be a common. So if we make the right decision on the front end, I'm sure we have a few customers, very low, it's on the margin, that now are full-time Uber or Lyft drivers, but it's on the margin.
Yeah, another question from.
So, on the question agreement, the testing is kind of a new thing in the future, and that's how people
We have them opt in at the point of sale. So from the very beginning, we have the opportunity to deploy texting. And at the same time, when we are engaged in the conversation, so if they happen to, I'll give you an example, they call to explain they're not going to be able to make their payment. Every collector follows this script. Is this the best number I can contact you at? So that then enables me I can reach out to that customer, whether it be text or otherwise, after that. And then those are recorded. Yes?
In top of the collector calling and texting, are you using automated service to text and email every day?
Yes. So within I mentioned different strategies.
The question,
sorry. Oh, sorry. The question becomes, in your dialer campaigns or your text campaigns, do you do what I would call text blasting? And we do. So the strategy which we look at, again, what are the customer's profile? And we do find that text blast at certain times of the day will then yield activity back. So first thing in the morning, usually I have a text blast depending on the level of delinquency to profile the customers. And that usually then brings volume back into the enterprise with either a response in text or a text and a phone call. But the phone call by itself is, the texting supplemented with phone call is a good recipe. Yes?
When you say you have them opt in at the point of sale, is that in your paperwork?
Yes.
What is the logistics of that?
Yeah. It's in our documentation. Yeah. In our deal jacket.
One of the things is the customer has to sign a customer statement as part of the application process, and some of those things are there.
Yeah. The issue we find in regards to opting in is the platform that we use for texting requires it, and we have a hard time getting the customer to respond to that, even though we also have it in our page. Mm-hmm. So we have the permission, but our platform we use won't allow us to communicate without that opt-in through that platform, and we do have a hard time getting the customer to do that.
I don't have the platform we use, it's certainly a compliant platform, but it's also in the means in which you use the tools. And so if a customer opts out, I grab that. And so I make sure that when they opt out, because even though I get it on the paper, you can still opt out. You can opt out the next day. And we do have the discipline in place. The customer will opt out, and I will not send that customer another text. Yeah. Now, if they come back in, and I talk to them, the script is read, that then enables me to return to my texting. You had a question over here.
I was curious on what you found successful in incentivizing your collectors.
Yes, yeah. So in the early stage, I find that certainly you want to have your compliance baselines in place, quality. Those are all, I would call it bare minimums. We try to keep it simple. So dollars per hour. Pretty simple. You also have some other KPI measures, meaning your production time. But frankly, your dollars per hour will drive that person to be in their seat, being available to make or take phone calls and texts. I do have a separate individual who kind of creates the dialing strategy, who we're going to speak to, how, the text campaigns. That is not in the hands of the people leaders. Try to do that in an analytical way to help drive outcome. And that's call it a new practice that we put in place, where in the past, each one of the collection managers were using their own strategy on how they were going to solve those. They had a set of accounts. So in my early stage, there's no ownership of accounts. Here's the degree of delinquency. Here's the call that you're supposed to be making. I present that in a dialer, and you work that lead. Next one, next one, next one, next one. Texting, inbound. It's a real, I call it a production environment. In the mid stage is very similar, but we do have the collectors. We present them accounts to work. We have some ownership In late stage, it's very much ownership. Those conversations are quite different, as you probably know. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I think we're on a long journey.
Yes.
Right? And it's a difference between if you have a very small shop, you're a dealership with 3 or 4 collectors, and you're a larger shop at scale. Both of us come from large organizations, and if you went into a Chase or any big bank and went to their collection centers, they would be working bucket. They'd have automated systems. Ownership would only happen very late in the process. And that's trying to use scale. We're at a mid-stage here. We've just about got enough scale to begin to do it that way. I wouldn't suggest doing it the way we're doing if you only have 3 or 4 collectors. Having ownership on a small scale is a good way of doing things. Where that transition point between where you start getting the advantages from the extra technology and specialization and other things is difficult. I think we're just about at the point where we can get value. But it took some time because we had collectors at stores, 10 years ago?
It's been a journey.
It's
we're
a
still
journey.
there.
It's not an easy thing.
It's a culture journey too for the people to embrace that, and that's something that I'm still looking to evolve into. So that said, we have some of our franchise owners who have 3, 4 stores, and they have moved into what I've just described and have found success.
Yeah.
Do the people in the mid-level understand how much they can make if they get better and go to
Oh, yes.
the highest tier?
Absolutely.
And is that like set in stone? You're going to make X if you get better, and does your education program allow them the ability to get?
Are you talking about our customers moving between tiers?
No,
you mean our
it's
collectors?
operations. This is an operational
Operations.
question on the incentives that are different by stage. And in the mid-stage, we also award on delinquency rate. So along with the dollars you're collecting, what's our delinquency rate? I need to have a different mindset in that. And at the same time as late stage, they own the accounts. What's your delinquency rate? What are you collecting?
Okay. We must be near the end as I see people being.
Pretty close
So we'll
to it.
take maybe one more question, and then anybody else who has things will be up here afterwards to answer anything you want. Is there any other questions from the audience?
I just want to make a couple of comments. So we're in this journey in operations. We've trained our customer. Our customer understands what our tolerance is for delinquency. They know we have an intent for repo letter. They know what it takes to trigger it. They know what it takes to stay off that fence. And they're quite clever, which is fine. They stay in the car. We make our money. But I can tell you that our early delinquency is an opportunity for me to figure out how we can bring that down. But that said, it's not flowing all the way through. So our charge-off, based on the intelligence we put in and our discipline we put in our operations, has been a fabulous journey. I still need to figure out how I can manage my early stage delinquency because our customers, they seem to be smarter than I am when it comes to early stage delinquency.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, everyone.